scripture is not meant to be understood. It's meant to be
Mm,
wrestled with. And so he uses
mm,
the imagery of Jacob
mhm,
wrestling with God or the angel of God.
mhm.
This depiction is of a man fighting God,
Yeah.
physically fighting the angel of God or God, however you want to read it. And to the point of walking away injured with a limp,
Mhm, mhm,
changed, transformed,
mhm,
wounded, and
mhm.
transfigured.
Welcome to Excavations. I am Connie Chen. This is a podcast that centers marginalized bodies, voices, topics, and I am here to excavate what I love. Today we have Colton, who I want to read you his Substack intro because I think this perfectly captures who he is. Um, Not free till we're all free. I'm good. I'm bad. I'm a Christian. I'm a sinner. I'm humble. I'm loud. I'm righteous. I'm a killer. I will ask Colton to introduce himself, but I think that is a very good capture of like the essence of what I learn from him in his content.
I appreciate that. That's actually a quote from a Kendrick Lamar song called Cushion Corinthians on on his mixtape or his album Section 80.
Mhm,
Depends on who you ask what it is. And it resonated with me when I actually first I started listening to Kendrick Lamar in like 2012, and I was sitting in this coffee shop and I heard this song come on.
mhm.
That's really a really popular song called "Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe." So I'm sitting in this coffee shop and I just hear these. I'm listening to like Spotify on like random or something, so just pulling up songs, and I hear, "I am a sinner who's probably gonna sin again. Lord, forgive me for things I don't understand. Sometimes I need to be alone. Bitch, don't kill my vibe." And I was like, "Yo, that is how I feel about life right now." I was at a conservative,
Mm, mm,
evangelical, charismatic evangelical university in Tulsa,
mm,
Oklahoma, and
mm,
in the process of really being challenged studying theology, all of the things I believe. And it resonated so much with me. I got into listening to a lot of his work. And when I found that song from Cushion Corinthians, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm a Christian, I'm a sinner, I'm humble, I'm loud, I'm righteous, I'm a killer. I was like, yo, that is speaking to my soul. So a little bit about me
mm.
for anybody who doesn't know me. I am from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm the son of a Pentecostal pastor. My grandfather was a Pentecostal pastor. My great grandfather was a Pentecostal pastor. And I thought my whole life that I was going to be a Pentecostal pastor. And so did everybody. I went to school at Oral Roberts University to study theology. I was the first person in my family to go to a real university where you actually got a degree. Some people had gone to Bible college, which,
Mhm.
for those of you that don't know, like a Bible college is basically just an indoctrination camp from a specific denomination, right? Where they just teach you to believe. And so, I went to college and I was getting all of this education and learning more, and it really started to change my thoughts about myself, Connie, because I grew up in our denomination. We were Oneness Holiness Pentecostal. Have you heard of that before?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so United Pentecostal Church, right? So we
Yeah.
didn't believe in the Trinity. We
Mm.
believed you had to be baptized in Jesus' name only, went to be
Uh-huh.
saved. So if they said Father, Son, Holy Spirit when you went under the water, it didn't count. And I
Mm.
went to ORU looking at all of them like they were fake Christians because they were Trinitarians. And I was going, it
Mm.
was a mission field for me. Like I was going to
Mm.
minister to that. And it's so funny that the thing that got me set on my course of becoming like a radical Marxist, atheist, Christian, or whatever I am today was actually studying early church history and moving more towards Catholicism. I almost converted to
Mm.
Catholicism and then Eastern
Mm.
Orthodoxy. At the time, I didn't understand that those were very right wing, you know, things. I felt like I was moving in a progressive direction because I think when you're young, it's so easy to mistake something that's subversive to your norm as being progressive,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Mhm.
Once I realized, like, man, what we were taught, what we believed was the truth, what I always believed was the truth, I felt like was different. Now, I've since exchanged those beliefs as well, but it started me realizing I can't hold or take for granted that any of the things
Mm.
I believe are so concretely true that you can't move on them. And it really just
Mm.
opened me up to everything. got married
Mm.
to a girl I started dating in college, and we've
Mm.
been together for 16 years now, married for it'll be
Wow.
13 years in May of this year. We have a 4-year-old
Mm.
and a 2-year-old, and we live here in Chicago. And so that's, my bio in a nutshell.
I love that. Well, like, I didn't know it was a Kendrick song. I'm not well versed in what's popular, but that's you are like you getting the listeners getting to know what I know, the limits of my knowledge. But the thing that I found the things that I found so I am very interested in why you included the I'm killer part. I'll
Mhm.
say a little bit more because I think that for me, at least, it resonated because
Mm.
it feels like a lot of how I was brought up as a Christian is washing yourself of the responsibility that we killed Christ,
Mm.
and I think that actually owning the
Mm.
responsibility changes my understanding of the cross a lot. So rather than just being like, this is here to atone us,
Yeah.
solely to atone us, we did something and there's
Mhm.
a response to something.
Mm.
There's a consequence to it of like the physical body of Jesus not being here.
Mm.
However, you understand that story, right? Like there to me, owning the killing, owning the desire in us to commit harm
Mhm.
is different than being like, I am a sinner, like I
Yeah.
am just perpetually a sinner. So I
Yeah.
wonder what, like, I was really struck by the I'm righteous, I'm a killer.
Yeah. So I
Tell
think,
us.
my Substack is called Kensington Cone, right? And
Yeah.
this idea of a cone is kind of like, it's not really a riddle, but it's in Zen tradition, a statement that seems contradictory or nonsensical.
Mhm,
What is the sound of one hand clapping is a very
mhm,
popular cone. And the point
mm,
of them is to make you sit and reflect on the inherent, not only meaning, but bifurcation that we have in ourselves. So we're
mm,
and really not bifurcation, a multi splitting, right? Like we all are different people in different places in different contexts. And
mhm,
so for me, I always want to live in the tension of the different things that I am and not try to
mm,
identify myself by one specific thought. I think about a quote from Stanley Hauerwas in this context,
mhm,
right? He's a great American theologian. There's a lot I disagree with Hauerwas on and a lot I'm inspired by. He's famously
mhm,
a pacifist. And I
mhm,
remember him being asked one time why he's a
mhm,
pacifist. And he said,
mm,
I have to be a pacifist because I'm a violent motherfucker.
mm,
And man,
mm,
that struck me so profoundly, right? Because a lot of times when people talk about pacifism, it can come off as this like, oh, it's how I'm just like a peaceful love to everybody, right? But no, like he's recognizing that inherent violence in himself. And it's interesting you connect it to killing Jesus because I,
mhm,
I I have a something I wrote on my Substack and a little my only attempt at what some people call poetry. I don't think of
mhm,
myself as somebody who's capable of writing poetry, but people have said, no, that's poetry. I imagine myself in the shoes of one of the people sitting or standing around the crowd as Jesus is facing Pontius Pilate.
yeah,
And given this choice in the narrative, the people
yeah,
between two different Jesuses, a lot of people don't know that Barabbas, the tradition has his name as Jesus Barabbas. And
mhm,
Barabbas being less of a name and more of a title, Bar Abbas, the son of the father. That
mhm,
this figure here, right? Luke, I think, depicts him not just as a thief, but as an
mhm,
insurrectionist. That what
mm,
the people are being given the choice of are two
mhm,
alternative messiahs, two different
yeah,
options to go with.
mm,
One who refuses to fight, who tells his followers,
mhm,
put away the sword, and another
mhm,
who is willing to pick up the sword. And I
mhm,
imagine most of the time when I hear that story, it's presented as, you don't want to be the people crying out, give us Barabbas, crucify him,
mhm,
right? Like that's
mhm,
wicked and that's wrong. But when I
mm,
imagine myself in the shoes of an oppressed Jew living in the first century under Roman colonization, under the heel of empire, I
mhm,
imagine myself desiring liberation for
mhm,
myself, for my family, for my people. And
yeah,
what am I supposed to do with a Messiah who won't fight for me? What am I supposed to do with a Messiah that's incapable of violence? Because
mm,
show me
mm,
the liberatory movement that ever took place without
with
violence, right?
nonviolence. Yeah.
Show me the speech. right? Show me the performance that achieves liberation without something actually happening, you know? And and I imagine if I was in that shoes, I would be crying out, "Give us Barabbas. Crucify him."
Mm,
And so
mm,
for me, that's what killer is in there because I recognize that not only as something I want to run away from, but as a necessary part of the
mm.
human experience.
Yeah. My response to that is I grew up on a farm
Hmm.
and I didn't really understand why we needed to kill the pig when you're a kid.
Mm,
You kill the pig is supposed to last you for the entire year. You
mm,
savor every part of the body, dry it, salt it, cure
yeah.
it. It's supposed to last the whole year. And when you understand why you need to kill the pig, and
Mm,
like this is not about vegan or like meat eating, but just that the animal kingdoms need to eat each other, right?
yeah.
You realize that like
Mm,
there's just a lot of things in life that we don't want to look at, right? Like we are eating bacon, we don't want to look at how we murder the pig.
right.
We're eating chicken, we don't want to look at how we're killing the chicken, right? And
Mhm.
someone has to do that work, right? And it is
Yes.
often in this country immigrants doing that work. And
Mhm.
my joke regarding like people in ICE being immigrants is like someone's got to do the dirty work. Who's going to take people to slaughter, right? Like slaughterhouse is filled with immigrants. My point is that someone has to be the killer, and there is no. There's a confusing, complex part of like human existence, right? And it's a strange thing to deny ourselves that identity. Anyhow,
Yeah. I know. I
that's
think that's really
yeah.
I think that's really important, Connie. Like, I think that if we want anything like wholeness or honesty, we can't
Hmm.
run away from parts that are inherent within us, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, mastery is, I think, never like the right term, but proficiency maybe is
Hmm.
better at ourselves and at our experience, not to always
Hmm.
give in to our base, right? There's a time.
Yeah.
There's a there's a
Yep.
time and a purpose for every season under heaven. There's a
Hmm.
time for killing and there's a time for peace.
Hmm. I wonder about that, what we would choose at the cross. Like who would we choose now? Isn't that the choice we're all making in this
Yeah.
revolution that we are claiming to be on, Okay, I want to talk today. I had Colton on because I wanted to talk to Colton about desire, because I
Hmm.
have personally never met a Christian man who has gone through any type of deconstruction and been able to talk to them about sex, porn, and just dating as a
Hmm.
Christian man in general. I will start by saying that, like, when I started dating Christian men after I don't even know if there is a after I left the church, because I don't go to church, but I don't think
Mhm.
I'm not a part of a church.
I resonate with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. But I would ask as a woman, I'm extremely skeptical about seeing a Christian man on a dating app and swiping right, right?
Hmm.
Because I know the world that we were brought up in. I know what you were taught about how to treat women and what is okay and what is not okay. And there will be a question that I always ask on these first dates that is very fun for me and perhaps really not fun for them. But I would ask them, like, what kind of porn do you watch?
Hmm.
And people are get like really squirmish, right? And I think that I I talk to a lot of my friends about this, and they're like, Connie, you're just giving them a hard time, And I'm like, sure, like maybe, right? Like, okay, maybe, but it's, to me, it's really important to know, what do you desire physically? Do you
Mm.
know your desires, right? Do you own your kink, right? Like, do you know you're a killer? Do you own your kink? To me, those are the same things, right? And I guess I will start by asking you, like, how did worshiping a male god all of your life
Hmm.
shape your romantic desire?
That's a question I've never considered, is
Mm,
specifically how worshiping a male god shaped and influenced my romantic life. I've thought a lot about how the broader project of being
mm-hmm,
raised in a Christian tradition shaped it.
mm-hmm,
I think that mostly what I've considered is that, and your question is challenging me right now
mm-hmm,
because mostly the way I've thought about it is that the
Mm-hmm.
worship of the god had nothing to do with it. It had to do with all of these extemporaneous, or not extemporaneous, but externalities associated with the religion that really have nothing to do with the religion itself, but have to do with
Yeah.
mechanisms of control that
Yeah.
find religion a useful tool to institute. But I think you're right that there probably has to be something there specifically about worshiping a male god. I can say broadly speaking that this is one of the areas that I still have the most trouble unpacking, because
Mm.
women I know in evangelical churches are taught to feel ashamed of their body, taught to
Yeah.
feel ashamed of their sexuality to a
Yeah.
deeper and more profound degree than men. But men are
Yeah.
taught that as well.
Yes.
And, I remember the shame associated with something like masturbation as a young boy.
Mm-hmm.
Once you start to do that, I think it took me well into adulthood to
Mm.
not feel immense shame after masturbation.
Mm.
And there was a time throughout my teenage years where it was so intense, Connie, that I had a physiological response that every
Mm.
time I masturbated, I would get a awful headache, like a splitting headache. And I don't know if
Mm.
it was from something I didn't understand what it was at the time, but I immediately associated that with God's anger at me for what I
Mm.
had done. And, in college, in undergrad, I went for a long time where
Mm.
I did not masturbate. I mean, over the course
Mm.
of several years. And it was a thing
Mm.
that I talked about. And the
Mm.
way I imagined it in my head, the way I communicated it was that
Mhm.
I did not want to objectify women and
Mm.
turn them into an object purely for my own gratification. And
Mhm.
I thought, man, even if I'm imagining it or watching it, I'm
Mhm.
dehumanizing that person by not
Mm.
putting them into the context of like any kind of actual relationship. That was how I
Mm.
processed it at the time. And
Mm.
I mean, it was the point where like, I was experiencing like pain, physical pain from not,
Yeah.
relieving myself sexually.
Yeah. Yeah.
You actually can experience pain. And even over the
Mm.
course of, getting married young at like 23, you know, navigating our sexuality was something my wife and I both had to do a lot of work on, right?
Mm.
Because for me, the shame was almost always located like in externally, like what I was doing to somebody else, like even how I conceptualized it there. Like if I think about a fantasize about a woman sexual or I watch porn, I'm hurting
Mhm.
somebody else. Whereas I think for a lot of
Mm.
women, it's more an
Mhm.
internal kind of shame. I never thought like
Mm.
I'm a slut for masturbating or I'm a sexual deviant. I thought like, oh, I'm
Mm.
using I'm oppressing another person,
Mm.
in doing that.
Mm. Mm.
And that's what makes me so interested in your question, because in what ways does worshiping a male god impact men and women differently sexually?
Mhm.
I'd be curious to hear you answer a little bit or talk a little bit about,
Mm.
because clearly you thought more about this, about what it means to worship a male god with our sexuality. I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I just wanna say I was so moved. I was moved I
Mm,
wanted to cry when you said that you've had physical pain because it's so it hurts me. Like, it hurts my body to hear that because it
mhm.
feels so antithetical to why we've been created, if we've been created,
Yeah,
to have these experiences of pleasure.
yeah.
And we we were constructed and controlled to choose pain instead of that. I used to teach this class called God Writing, Writing God when I was at the
Mm,
University of Iowa. And I asked people to write their own gods. We would write their own 10 commandments and like, we would read the 10 commandments and I asked people,
mhm.
would you swipe right on this God? Like, can you write your own 10 commandments? Because we say we love God, but do we desire God? Would you
Mm,
go out with God? Would you have sex with God?
mhm.
Truly, because it's supposed to be personal relationship, right? Not political, only
Right.
personal relationship. So, yeah, do you want to date this God, right? Who
Yeah.
commands you this way? And students would write all these commandments that are really moving. And that taught me a lot. And I used to do this exercise with them, which is why I'm getting to this point, is that I would ask everyone, sit and close their eyes and tell me how you know that you have a body. Like if you've never been told you have a body, how do you know you have one?
Yeah.
And everyone, and this is way more like impactful in a group, but everyone will say that they feel some kind of pain,
Right.
right? And
Wow. Yeah,
that
you're
is
right.
right. Everyone will say something hurts, not comfortable. Like that's how I know I have a body, right? And I live with chronic pain. That's how I
Mm.
know I have a body, which is why to me, this thing is so fucked up because
Yeah.
we have pleasure senses, right?
Mhm.
And the experience of being a human, like we've only been taught in this world, you will have trouble, like, and it's like, yes, there's a lot of suffering. I don't evade it. I don't romanticize my suffering, but there's a lot of pleasure in this world, right?
Mm.
And how to have ethical pleasure is a question that just the church just is like, no, don't talk to me. We can't touch that, right? And it feels so irresponsible. And it is irresponsible and like, let me push it to say violent, right? Because like,
Mhm.
right, said to you, like if we remove ourselves from all this construct, which I still cannot fully do, right? But
Right.
if I said to you, I'm engineering an animal, a thingy, robot, and they can feel pleasure and pain, and I only control them to feel pain, I
Mm.
would call that like abuse, right? Like
Yeah.
it
100%.
seems abusive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like this kind of religious abuse, like, yeah, like it's calling something abuse feels both like difficult and also like it just is what it is. Feeling that like acknowledging the abuse is important, and also like how do you de-shame all this stuff, right? Like so that's just I'm very, it hurts me that the abuse looks like this, right? And that
Yeah.
all of this has to happen in silence. Like you can probably only talk about this with your wife. Like how do you like
Yeah.
who is there to navigate? How do you navigate all of this, right?
Hmm.
Because it's like even outside of the church, you're not really supposed to talk about it unless you go to therapy, which people sometimes don't have access to, or
Mhm.
it really helps if a religion tells you you shouldn't be going to therapy. So that is really helpful. Okay, for me, I think worshiping a male god, aside from the kind of just the homophobic aspect of it in the church, I don't know if I would be so sure that I'm
Mm.
heterosexual
Mm.
if you taught me to worship a female god. And we know like the Bible took out a lot of the feminine aspects of God, even like
Yeah.
in the pronouns, in the translation, etc. Right? So I wonder if we would just be attracted, if more
Mhm.
women will be attracted to women sexually if we
Mm.
did worship a female god, right? Like I don't know if so many of us would be staunchly heterosexual, you know?
Mhm.
That's like one aspect. And the other aspect is I think that because I worshiped a narcissistic God, I
Mhm.
dated a narcissist. Like that is the clearest connection that I can draw of I dated a man, I dated an emotionally abusive man
Mm.
mm, because I had an emotionally abusive God, right? Or
Mm.
the God that I was presented with was emotionally abusive, as in this God just kind of can do anything at any time that he wants, and you're supposed to desire it, right?
Right.
The problem is that you're supposed to want to swipe right on it. Like, let's bring it. Desire is such a like abstract term, right? Like, let's put it in modern terms. You are supposed to want to swipe right on a God that like does whatever he wants, allows random, very violent things to happen to people and especially to women, face zero consequences, doesn't take any responsibility, right? Like that's a lot of the Old Testament God that was drilled into me as like growing up
Yeah.
evangelical, right?
Yeah.
So you are not only supposed to be okay with that, you are supposed to love that. You're
Mm.
supposed to want to give your body to that.
Mm.
That is the being that you open your legs for.
Right.
And that is extremely problematic.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is so clear that the image and the depiction of God from mostly patriarchal societies throughout history,
Yeah.
at least that's what's won out, right? Like we know from
Yeah.
scholarship that ancient Hebrews actually did have female gods in their pantheon. And so who knows what things were actually like back then, right? So much of the Hebrew
Mhm.
Bible has been rewritten, redacted, changed over time, experienced in different iterations. But to have, in addition to how you beautifully and clearly articulated all of that, so much of the tradition itself is based around what women can and can't do with their bodies
Yeah.
sexually and just through experiencing like what women have to where they have to go outside in a tent on their period. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't imagine that level of coercive abuse. When I think about it as from a male perspective, I always was intrigued actually because I found it interesting that you said you wonder if you didn't worship a male god if we would be more sexuality fluid, right?
Yes.
And I believe that everybody probably has the capacity for same-sex attraction and to whatever
Yes.
degree it's been conditioned out of us because you talk about like, would you want to date this God? Would you want to have sex with this God? I always was compelled by the language of the text. Song of Solomon, famously erotic literature. But I didn't read Song of Solomon because it was too embarrassing for me. But still
Mm.
deeply embedded within all of our like language and worship was romantic language as a man aimed at God. We sang
Yeah.
Jesus, lover of my soul, right? He was in church as a man. And I'm saying, this man, Jesus, is my lover. What does that mean? What does it mean to be the lover of my soul? Is he the lover
Mhm.
of my body, right?
Mm.
The dualism that we've created
Mhm.
between nature and supernature as a
Mhm.
way of expressing and experiencing homoerotic desire that's disassociated from our bodily experience, right?
Mhm.
Has always been something that I've never I've not dug too much into, but I've always been compelled by that. You know,
Mm.
famously, there's a South Park episode where Cartman starts a Christian rock band. Have you ever seen this?
I have not.
Okay. So Cartman starts
Tell
a
us.
Christian rock band called Faith Plus One is the name of the
Yeah.
band. And it's making fun of CCM Christian music culture,
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
what Cartman realizes, he's like, guys, we can like go platinum. We can make a lot of money and be a huge band. All we have to do is take these love songs and just
Mhm.
take a word out and put God in there. Right.
Yeah.
And so the songs are, if I can recall, and it's been a decade or more since I've seen this, but
Mm.
are like, body of Christ. Oh, I love that body all muscled up and toned. The body of
Mhm.
Christ.
Yeah.
And he's actually
Yeah.
like exploring this idea of sexuality with God. So,
Mm.
yeah, what as far as like worshiping a male
Mm.
God, I've always wondered where does this come from and what does it mean for me as a man to be the bride of Christ?
Mhm.
Right? Like, isn't
Mm.
that don't d I feel like that's language that's almost transgressive in the evangelical space. Like, would you
Yeah.
really wanna call you that using that feminine language? Because a lot of times we get caught up on wanting to point out that there's feminine language for God in the Bible, that a lot of that has been taken out. But what's interesting to me that often doesn't get talked about is not just that there's feminine language for God in the Bible, but there's feminine language that all men, humans, especially Christians, are supposed to fit into, right?
Mm. Oh, no, you're just making me see an image of like the reconstructed church where men just dress up in drag in wedding
Yeah.
dresses and showing up to church. And what is that like? What is it,
Mhm.
like how do we take it literally? Sorry. Go ahead.
That kinda gets to, at a point, like, I think for me, you know, I've always tried not always, I have tried in most of my adult life to be an
Mhm.
ally for trans people, and I have trans friends, and I believe in the importance of advocating for trans futures, but I've never been confused enough to think that I have more to give to trans people than trans people have already
Mm.
given to me, because it's been the
Mm.
trans community that has constantly challenged me and,
Mm.
um, challenged me to confront what it is it about myself that I'm so
Mm.
afraid of.
Mm.
I think that one of the reasons there's so much anger
Yeah.
in straight male Christian communities towards gay people, towards
Mm-hmm.
trans people, is because what they represent are humans who have had a level of courage, clarity, and self awareness to be willing to not hide themselves
Yeah.
because of culture and tradition, but to
Mm-hmm.
like embrace the reality of what they know to be, to truly live their experience.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think about the period in my life where I was disgusted, repulsed by homosexuality. I remember as a
Mm-hmm.
young teenager seeing a movie and two men kissed, and I remember just being filled with like anger about it. And
Mm-hmm.
where does that come from? Because what is
Mm-hmm.
anger other than passion directed in a certain way? You know what I mean? Pain,
Mm-hmm.
like there's, you talk about like how do we know we're in a body? There's pain and
Mm-hmm.
there's pleasure, right? Well,
Yeah.
like pain and pleasure are not mutually exclusive. You know,
Yeah.
they're not dichotomous to each other. They're part of our human experience. Can
Mm-hmm.
we truly experience pleasure if we don't understand pain? And can we truly
Mm-hmm.
understand our pain if we don't understand pleasure?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you know, like trans people, gay people are constantly making me wonder what is it about myself that I'm afraid to hide? Because
Mm-hmm.
when I look at a trans person, what I see is a mirror reflecting my own image back to me of my own fear of living a
Mm-hmm.
certain way. And I'm not saying I'm not trans. I'm not like that's not like a thing that I'm hiding and want to bring out. I don't think, and I'm afraid that people would think that, and that's fine.
This is the coming out party.
But in the broader context of sexuality, I told you earlier that this has been one of the hardest areas for me to unpack because I
Mm.
find myself existing in this
Mhm.
space where I'm totally affirming of sexuality as an important human
Mhm.
experience at an intellectual level,
Mhm.
fully affirming of trans people, fully
Mhm.
affirming of queer people of all shapes and sizes and sorts, of even things like polyamory. But
Mhm.
to me, I find myself defaulting to
Mhm.
what's the word? Prudishness, right? Like
Mm. Mhm.
I I have a friend who's recently divorced
Mhm.
and going on, I've had other friends, he hasn't called it this, but I've had other friends get divorced and they went on what they called a hocation. They're like, I'm on my
Sure.
hocation. Just,
Sure.
sleeping with as many people as possible. And
Sure.
there's like a degree to which I am not like, I don't think that that's wrong. But there's
Sure.
like a part of me that's like, what are you doing? Why are you
Yeah.
doing that to yourself? And I think in my mind, I'm still like conditioned and trapped by this sense that we should be ashamed of our desires.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still deal with that. Like
Yeah.
everybody pretends, not everybody. There's a lot of people pretend that they don't watch porn. I love that you asked that question
Yeah.
to guys that you might be dating or have dated. Like, what kind of porn do you watch? Because have you ever had people tell you I don't watch porn
Yes.
when you ask that
And
question?
I'm like,
That's a
yeah,
lie.
yeah. You're lying.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
lie, right? And, it's like that's what I mean about, like, what trans people expose for everybody else, is that,
Mhm.
like, there are things about our lives that we're still not willing to be honest with ourselves about,
About.
or with anybody else about, that we still hide deeply, right? Like, I can acknowledge that I watch porn. The prospect of answering that question on a first date would terrify me, right? For other reasons as well, right? I think
Yeah.
I would,
Yeah.
and I know how I
Yeah.
would answer it, but I think there's also a sense in which, I'm gonna get canceled for this, and because people are gonna hear me
Okay.
saying something that I'm not saying, because the least marginalized thing you could be in this world is a straight white man. So I just wanna
Yeah.
recognize that right there, right?
Okay.
I
Okay.
I I have the least marginalized identity imaginable, right? Except for that I grew up extremely impoverished and, have always been in a position of financial precarity. But to navigate in this society, being a straight white man who doesn't want to give in to masculinity or
Mhm.
to toxic masculinity,
Mhm.
I would be afraid, if you asked me that question, of answering in a
Mhm.
way that makes me look not woke. or makes me look
Mm-hmm.
patriarchal or makes me look
Yeah.
aggressive. The idea of like
Yeah.
owning your kink is,
Yeah.
I think, profoundly powerful
Mm,
idea that
mm.
for me, even having gotten to the point where I, on paper, I'm fully affirming of whatever and supportive of whatever, but I still deal with that internal shame and guilt and fear around all of that.
I love this conversation. I think it's so important. And I'm like, I wonder, I guess my question is like, what happens when that comes up, right? Because like I have those, like when I hear you, I'm like, polyamory. God is
Mm,
polyamorous. I'm sorry, but God is not monogamous with me, right? Like God loves
right.
you too. Like
Yeah.
you may not like that, but like God also loves me and God loves the enemy, right? Like whoever
Yeah.
our enemy is, right? So God is fully poly. And then like Hocation, right? Solomon, how many hundred wives?
Yeah.
It's like we like the biblical marriage, right? Is really polygamy. And
Hmm.
so it's like we have this construct of like the thing that is right and so on. How do you feel that voice, right? Like what are you doing? And then what happens? Like how do we care for that part of us
Mm,
who doesn't we didn't do anything wrong. We were told this. You are gonna go to hell if you don't have sex like this, if you don't get married like this, right? Like I used to think Deuteronomy 22 or 21, where you have to like put up your blood sheet, like blood from your bed sheet to prove that you're a virgin, right? I
right.
was like, what if your hymen tore from like
Hmm.
sports? Like, would it
Hmm.
like what would happen? Like, what would happen to me? I posted
Hmm.
the Virgin Mary video. I
Yeah.
was so moved. Do you know how many women commented that they
Mm,
felt so scared that God would randomly impregnate them when they were teenagers?
wow.
Like, I didn't even know that, right? Because that's not something I experienced. And if anyone my age experienced that, they weren't telling me, right? So like, I was like, oh my God, like I didn't know that like your story, right? Because who would
Mm,
have told me that? Who would have told me that
hmm.
like I tried so hard not to masturbate that I would have physical pain
Hmm.
after masturbating and now feel this shame? Like, what do we do? And you said you like, it wasn't until you're an adult that you feel more comfortable masturbating.
Yeah.
How do you care for that part of you who is just doing what we were supposed to do? You're supposed to not go on Hocation, right? Like you're
Mm,
supposed to not be attracted to the same sex because that is what we've been told.
right. Yeah. Okay. So I think when I say like it took me well into my adult years, it's because,
Mhm.
you get married as an evangelical or as a Christian, a conservative Christian who's been taught to be ashamed of their sexual desire, both the man and the woman. If you
Yeah.
have like a marriage like that, like I do, it took years because you're afraid to admit to your spouse or your partner that you're doing that.
Mhm.
Are they going to think that I'm being unfaithful? Are they going to think that they're not desirable? Or that I have to find that outside of them? Are they
Mhm.
going to be, repulsed? How do I say this without naming anybody or outing any names? I just say a person that I know, a person
Mhm.
that I
Mhm.
know, um, you know, that I'm close to she was engaged to a man, and this was right around the time my wife and I were getting engaged, and this person
Mhm.
was engaged, and they're close to me and my wife, and they found out that their fiance looked at porn, and they called off the engagement. It was over. And it was like, "Can you believe that?" And I thought that struck terror and fear into me because I
Mhm.
thought, "Oh my god, if my wife ever found out that I do
Mhm.
this,
Mhm.
right, then would it be over for me too?" And so a lot of the
Mhm.
hiding is out of fear of losing a relationship even.
Yeah.
How do we get out of that? I find something you said, I don't know if, this was when we were off camera before we started recording, but you were talking about challenge or the practice, having somebody read the Song of Solomon while touching
Yeah.
themselves, right?
Yeah.
Sexually for pleasure.
Yeah.
It actually
Yeah.
made me think about I don't know if it was Mark Twain or somebody wrote about Puritan boys would
Mhm.
masturbate to the Song of Solomon while reading the Song of Solomon. I remember hearing that for the first time and
Mhm.
thinking, like, how could you do that? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
With the word of God in your hand, right? The same word of God that details the creation of our sexual organs, right? Same word of
Mhm.
God that like
Mhm.
details, that talks about pleasure. Like, how could you read erotica in the Song of Solomon and think sexually? We're that discombobulated. And I
Yeah.
think that the answer for how we fix that or change that is the same for everything. It's a mix of learning and
Mhm.
practice. I don't think there's
Mm.
any amount of ideology that can
Yeah.
concretize itself into material change, right? Like in the
Yeah.
political sphere, I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of people think if I can just get the right ideas into my head,
Mhm.
then it will change. But
Yeah.
actually, all the ideas can do is give you new ways of acting and living and behaving in the world. And so
Mm.
that's why I was so intrigued by your suggestion there to people that they do that. Not only do they expose themselves to the erotic nature of the Book of Song of Solomon, right? But that they do it while taking a physical act and engaging. And so I think that it
Mm.
has to look like something like um, getting around people who talk differently about sex and about
Mm.
pleasure. You have to expose yourself
Mm.
to ideology that's different,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then also you kind of have to do it. And for me in my life, when at a certain point, when you're married for 13 years, you hide things for a couple of years, but then there's nothing hiding. We've always lived in a 1 bedroom apartment. Now we have 2 kids, we live in a small
Mm.
2 bedroom apartment. We've never had like a lot of
Mm.
space.
Mm.
And so you eventually work those things out. And
Mm.
I remember the first time that conversation ever actually came up with my wife, having so much fear that this could end our
Mm.
lives. And then
Mm.
discovering, like, no, that's not the case. That, like, we both understand and
Mm.
recognize that, like, pleasure and self-satisfaction has actually been able to enhance our sex life in our own
Mm.
marriage, right? Being for
Mhm.
women in a general sense, I think being able to, like, I hear sex therapists talk about this, and psychologists around sex, that like specifically for women that grew up in evangelical culture that are struggling with sex, right? Like, isn't there really even a condition that makes sex painful for women that oftentimes
Yeah.
is rooted in psychology? I
Yeah.
forget what that's called.
I don't know the name off the top of my head, but I know what you're yeah. There's something
Yeah.
I've read something like that, yeah.
And so, like, learning to experience yourself, I think so many Christian adults don't even know what brings them pleasure. You ask, like, "Do you own your
Yeah.
kink?" They don't even
Yeah.
know what their kink is. Now,
Yeah.
they probably know at a subconscious level because they go to the same kind of porn all the time, but we
Yeah.
we kinda split. Like, I know that for most of my life, if I did masturbate, I would disassociate, right? Like, pretty
Mm.
significantly. Like, there's
Yeah.
there's me, and then there's that, me doing that, and that's not, something
Mm.
that you just try to forget about it, right?
Mm.
Put the computer away, put the phone away, put everything away, just pretend like it didn't happen, not just for other people, but even for myself.
For
I don't know
yourself.
how normative that experience is for other men though, Connie.
Mhm.
Honestly, I just don't know, because I've always been felt very disconnected from other conservative men who are entrenched in patriarchy, that,
Mhm.
like, there's this whole idea of like locker room humor.
Yeah.
Famously the Trump saying, grab him by the pussy, and the
Mhm.
defense of that was like, this is just locker room humor. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's rape talk. Like,
Yeah.
and that's just how men talk when they're around each other. That's not how me and my friends talk when we're around each other, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've never gravitated or been around it, but I know that that does exist. And so,
Mm.
I just want to acknowledge that in addition to what I'm explaining as my experience, that there's a
Yeah.
whole nother spectrum of male experience towards sexuality that's
Yeah.
aggressive in a completely different way, that's just as
Mm.
toxic and damaging, if not more or less.
Mm. What would you tell your younger self about sex that, like, no one in the church said to you? How would you raise your children? How would you talk to them about sex and masturbation?
Yeah, that's a good question, and something I think about with I have 2 boys, and,
Mm.
I think it starts way before you start talking about sex and masturbation. It just starts
Mm.
with how you just talk about your body in general. I was
Mm.
raised to call my penis privates,
Mm.
right? You
Mhm.
wouldn't say the word, ever,
Mhm. Mm.
ever.
Mm.
Um, I'm 9 years older than my sister. So when my little sister came home, I did a lot of the diaper changing for my sister. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mm.
And, when we were teaching her how to talk about her vagina, right, or her vulva, right, it was this is so silly and dumb. We told her it was called a front bummy. You
Mm.
have your back bummy and a front bummy,
Mm.
right? Which because I think there's this sense that like children just aren't it's not appropriate to talk to children about these terms. So for
Mhm.
me, it's started by making sure my children understand that this is their penis and these are their testicles. We call them balls or nuts
Mhm.
sometimes, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you know, my son, right, will say things that I'm like, I could never have imagined myself saying that. Like,
Mm.
"Dad, look at my penis. It looks big right
Mm.
now. What is it?" And I'm like, I would
Uh.
never have acknowledged that as a kid because just
Mm.
by the very nature of not being able to name it, it taught me to be ashamed of
Mhm.
it. Like, this is my privates,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
Not to mention a whole 'nother danger there where people who harm children sexually have gotten off because the child is not able to adequately in court express what happened to them because they don't have the language for it. That's a whole
Mm.
nother issue. My in-laws, when my son was a infant, I love my in-laws,
Mhm.
right? I'm one of those weird people who has somehow managed to change drastically what I think politically, theologically, and maintain a great relationship with my parents and my in-laws who are all right-wing evangelical conservative MAGA people, right?
Mm.
But
Mm.
my mother-in-law, when my son was born, we were changing his diaper, and I said something about I referred to his penis, and she was like, "Don't
Mhm.
call it that." And I was like,
Mm.
"What do you mean?" And she was like, "He's innocent. You don't need to use language like that." Isn't that interesting? Just talking about the fact that my son has a penis is perceived, and this is no shade on her. This is her trauma and conditioning as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I pretended like I didn't know what she was getting at, but I knew exactly what she was getting at. I
Yeah.
felt it too, and it was because it was a active choice my wife and I made to do that. We
Yeah.
talked about, right? What will we say? What will we call this? But when to view
Mm.
even letting a child know that they have a penis is somehow stripping them of their innocence.
Mm.
So that is first and foremost what I'd say is if I would go back in time, I would tell myself, "You have a
Yeah.
penis," right? And,
Mm.
my son asked me recently, he's asking
Mhm.
about babies being born and how are babies
Mm.
being born? And
Mhm.
he's 4. And
Mhm.
I had to really think about, like, what I was gonna say here because we all know there's all kinds of euphemisms and
Yeah.
I was told a stork brings the baby at first, and you develop
Mm.
that over time. And,
Mm.
it wasn't until I was 13 or 14 that my dad ever told me about sexual intercourse. And even then, the language was so extrapolated from like the embodied reality that I
Mhm.
didn't really properly perceive it or understand it. I thought that you peed on a woman and she got pregnant. Like I didn't understand what my body was for. I didn't know at the time that when I masturbated that what was coming out of my body. I didn't
Yeah.
it's interesting kind of because we think that like, oh, well, you experience something and so you have a concept of it and not the language for it. But I'm pretty
Mm.
sure linguists have like taught us in a lot of ways that language actually gives you an idea that without language, you might not even have a concept for a thing. So even though
Yeah.
it was having certain bodily experiences,
Mm.
not only did I not have the language to express it, I didn't have the concept for it. So I would tell myself,
Mm.
"You have a penis." My son asked me,
Mm.
how are babies born, and I told him because he knows that girls have vaginas, and
Yeah.
you know, I, you don't have to give them every piece of language because they can only contain so much at 4 years old. They
Yeah.
only understand so much. But I told him that there's that people have sex, right? That some people have
Mhm.
penises and some people have vaginas, and they do something called sex, where the daddy or that where the person with the penis puts a seed into the person with the vagina,
Vagina.
through their vagina,
Mhm.
through their penis into the vagina, and then it goes
Mm.
into an egg, and then that grows like eggs grow, right? I'm just trying to explain it.
Mm.
That might not
Yeah.
even be the right way to explain it, I don't know. But what I was trying to
Mhm.
accomplish was
Mm.
to make sure he has a concept of that.
Yeah.
And I think we also stay away from talking about consent at all,
Mm.
which is damaging because then young men don't know how to receive,
Ask.
accept consent or ask consent. But
Mhm.
also, when you don't have the language of consent, you almost don't even have the language for to talk about or conceive of what is and isn't okay to do with my body. you
Yeah.
know? And so even
Mm,
now, if I'm giving him a bath and I need to help him wash around his penis because he's just not getting it enough, right? I try to let him have as much control as possible. I ask for permission, right,
mm,
first. And I say like,
mm,
"Hey, daddy needs to clean this part right here. Can I do that?" "Yes, that's okay." Kisses, right? "Can daddy have a kiss?" Kids will say,
mm,
if they don't feel like it, they'll say no.
mm, mhm,
And what I see a lot of dads do is in what is they're trying to do is like a playful, loving way, force a kiss, right? Like, "Oh, come on, come here,
mhm,
give me." Mwah."
mm,
But what we're teaching them is that, like, they don't actually have autonomy over their body. And so I think
mhm,
young Colton had a lot of shame and guilt around sex because I didn't even know what was and wasn't okay to do with my body. And so I
mm,
perceived almost everything I could do with it as bad in a sexual way.
mm.
Does that make sense or am I just rambling?
I'm just moved. I just kind of want to cry. That's where I
Mm,
am. I feel like it's really hard to like have been taught the things that we have been taught about our bodies and to really make a conscious decision to change the lives of our children, right? And
mm,
like I'm just listening in admiration and just I'm just
mm,
letting my heart be like moved by you and how you are like resisting the shame, right? I want to pull this up because I've just been thinking about this nonstop. But like when the angel was tell I don't need to pull it up. I'm just gonna the angel tells Mary, Gabriel tells Mary that she's gonna conceive, right? And she says, you will conceive a boy, you will name him Jesus. And people say that that's consent, right? And you just hear the difference in just like how you ask your son, like, can I wash this part? Not
mm,
daddy will wash this, right? Like,
mhm,
and like, I know that a lot of we're all just trying to break the cycle of trauma that we've been conditioned, right? But
mhm,
it just seems I don't even know if I can say I'm so proud of you. Like
mm,
I feel this like joy of like what it would like, it you're giving your son something that you've never had and you were
mhm,
never taught how to give.
mm,
You were never shown an example of how to do that. And like, I ask you these questions because not because I have an answer to any of these things, but because I'm like, it feels hard enough to navigate your body as a person who isn't in charge of another person
mm,
being, right? Of like,
yeah.
you need to navigate your own shame while navigating not passing on the shame, and that
Yeah, it's a
seems,
challenge.
yeah. And like the thing that I ask, which is difficult for me to ask, just as not to you, but just as a question in general, is like,
Mm,
you are able to do this. And how do we reckon with the fact that the scripture didn't? Right?
mm,
Like we can say it's a patriarchal text, blah 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 blah. But like, what is like we are able to do this. I know that I wouldn't say to my child, you will I will wash your vagina. I wouldn't even say that, right? Like I wouldn't even go there. I will do
mhm,
this, right?
right.
Like so, how it's not an answerable question, but the feeling, the emotion I'm sitting with is just how is this the text being passed on? How is so many people harmed by it in such a private way? And the
Mhm,
reclaiming of it is also so private. Like no one's gonna televise how you're not going to do a live and be like, let me show you how to model consent to your children while I'm washing my child's penis.
yeah,
None of this is public, right? Like you talking to your kids about in the future masturbation, that's also silenced, right? Like it's in this really contained sphere that we have these conversations. And it feels like I think my response is like, let's open the pressure cooker. Let's like
yes.
release some air. Let's release some of it,
Mm,
while we can. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Connie, you said, said something in you're referencing your video about Mother Mary or Mother Mary
Mhm.
about Mary. Is that interesting? I identify her as not being asked for consent and being
Yeah,
told you will be
yeah,
impregnated. And I found
yeah.
that very brave, like a brave take, especially in our space, because
Mm,
a popular take on it right now, one recently presented by James Tallarico on the Joe Rogan show, is to
mm,
insist that because Mary said yes, that
mm,
she was asked for consent. But
mm,
we all know that like consent given in an unequal power distribution is not consent. Like, how
mhm,
can Mary consent to God? If a woman can't consent to her boss at work, right?
mhm.
Or a child
Yeah,
can't consent to an adult, how
yeah,
can a 13-year-old girl consent to
yeah,
God, you know?
yeah.
I think that's really profound because I think if we do want to reclaim our sexuality, especially for people who
Mhm,
are maybe still Christian or even maybe you're not Christian anymore, but you're still so deeply influenced by that, we have to learn how to wrestle with scripture. My theological mentor is a guy named Dr. Chris Green. He's a bishop in
mm,
the Church of Evangelical Episcopal Communion Churches in the
mhm,
Diocese of St. Anthony, and he's a theologian who teaches at Southeastern University. He's my
mhm,
goat. He's just
mhm,
amazing. CEW Green.
mhm,
He has a book called Sanctifying Interpretation, Vocation,
mm,
Holiness, and Scripture that
mhm,
was so impactful for me in thinking
mm,
about what it means to read the Bible. And
mm,
he talks about like rather than asking how to understand the Bible, like our
mm,
epistemology, he asks how God uses it to save and transform us. And he talks about it as an ascetical gymnasium. And so for him, scripture is not meant to be understood, it's meant to
mm,
be wrestled with. And so he uses the
mm,
imagery of
mm,
Jacob wrestling with God or the angel of God.
mhm,
This wasn't just like sometimes we view that as just like passive, but like
mhm.
this depiction is of a man fighting God,
Yeah.
physically fighting the angel of God or God, or however you want to read it, and to the point of walking away injured with a limp,
Mhm, mhm,
changed,
mhm,
transformed, wounded, and transfigured. And so Green talks about like the goal, that interpretation of scripture is inseparable from
mm,
the reader's calling or vocation to pursue holiness. That's
mm,
interesting because he also talked what and that can be taken the wrong way because I think people understand holiness from I grew up in a holiness Pentecostal church. It just means rules, right?
mm,
Green really rejects this kind of like strict methodological approach and
mm,
insisted that we learn to read the text in an imaginative and with an imaginative and effective sensitivity, right?
mhm,
And that it has to be like that our theology has to be morally responsive, that it has to take into
mm,
account the suffering and injustice of the world. The reason I'm getting into all of that is to say, like, I think there's a move that's commonly made by
mm,
progressives in the Christian space, which is
mm.
to do too much work to try to make the Bible agree with all of our and align with all of our
Our
progressive values,
ideas. Yeah,
our ideas.
yeah.
And, and I know you're gonna have Maddie May Modal on this podcast soon, and she's somebody that
Mhm,
I always wanna ask questions because she's like a real biblical scholar, and I'm like
yeah.
a the definition of a wannabe, like, theologian, like, armchair guy, because she's specifically, like, an expert in Paul. And a lot of the work around Paul and sexuality seems to do and you referenced this just a minute ago. It's just to say like, well, Paul is not homophobic. Scripture is not homophobic because the reason that he says not to have sexual relations between men and women is not about it, they didn't have sexual orientation like we have today.
Mhm,
It was different. It was about power dynamics in a patriarchal society. And it's like, hey, however you arrive at not letting two men love each other and have sex, or two women loving each other and have sex, I don't know how that can be construed as being pro LGBTQ. I
mm,
also think that what we end up doing is then making the experience of like maybe they didn't have like the way to think about it in the orientation and how it's developed today. But I just can't believe that men didn't love each other
yeah,
until the modern concept of or sexual orientation was developed, that women didn't
yeah,
love each other until that was developed. And I think that
yeah.
there's a reason why it was viewed. I know that there's like a reason why they were
Mhm,
opposed because in Rome, right? Like
mhm,
a man could have sex with their slave
Yeah.
man, but not with another free Roman citizen. Well,
Yeah.
why is that? Well, it's
Mhm.
because it would be viewed being on the receiving end of that would be viewed as demasculating and humiliating way. That sounds homophobic to me. I don't know how
Yeah.
else like to
Yeah.
describe that. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's like it's less about like trying to make the Bible say what we want
Agree
it to
with me.
say, but being okay. Like Green is like, we have to confront the reality that people
Mhm.
in our spiritual and religious lineage and tradition throughout
Mhm.
history have believed all of these things. Not only have they used the text to enforce patriarchy and homophobia, but the ones who were writing the text were writing it to
Mm.
enforce patriarchy and homophobia in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, maybe not perceived as
Mm.
homophobia. I don't know what else you
Mm.
call that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, if we can't be transfigured, and then by reading it, the text becomes transfigured, which goes to
Mhm.
Origen, one of my favorite church fathers, who's particularly interesting for this conversation because
Mhm.
Origen thinks so creatively, right? We have the pre-existence of souls, we have
Mhm.
universal salvation, we have
Mhm.
him teaching you how to read the allegory of the text and say, hey, like if you see the text doing something that doesn't fit the nature of what we see God revealed as in Christ, that's the shell of the almond, spit it out and look for the deeper meaning. But
Mm.
Origin also dealt with sexual lust so badly, or was afflicted by his inability to understand and accept his sexuality, that he used to throw himself into thorn bushes when he would have an erection or a sexual thought, and eventually
Mm.
castrated himself so that he
Mhm.
would stop having sexual thoughts. Isn't that
Mm.
interesting? And
Mm.
it's and the reason I talk about him and bring it all up at all is you started this conversation off by saying, you know, that you haven't really talked to many or if any men who are Christians that have deconstructed, and I don't really like that term too much. That's a whole nother conversation. But I haven't really like deconstructed I use it because I know what people mean by it.
Yeah.
Deconstructed their faith.
I don't like the
But there's a
ED
lot.
of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me,
Yeah.
it's like,
It's not, yeah, like I don't know how to say it, but like to me, I've made a video on this, but I was like, God is still deconstructing, you know? So like
yeah,
God is always deconstructing. How do you think you're
yeah,
done? Like we're not done. It's fine. But
yes.
but I don't like
I
but
also
there's
like
no
to I also like to frame it in an affirmative way, right? Like
mm,
I'm not deconstructing. I am constructing my life and my worldview. I am building it.
mm,
And a part of that is
mm,
tearing down structures that don't work anymore or that
yeah.
are rotted, right? Like if I'm building a house or an
Mm,
addition onto a house and there's a wall that's rotted out by termites, I
mm,
don't say like a part of what I'm doing to build the house is deconstructing something, right?
yeah.
But that's sometimes I feel like when it's when it's framed as if this tearing down is the only thing that we're doing here, it
Mm,
creates like a negative vacuum. But and that might not be
yep.
the case for everybody. Some people push back. Hartley with no nonsense spirituality has been like that doesn't make any sense, and I respect her, so I might not know what I'm talking about. But so you said that, but here's the deal. You went to Harvard Divinity School. So
Mhm,
you know a lot of men who understand theology, who
mhm,
can get the content. People like Origin, who deconstructed in some ways, but
mhm.
still he was
Yeah.
willing to transgress everything that you weren't allowed to believe in
Yeah.
Christianity. He's like, screw it. Like, I'm going to stay faithful to my experience and what I believe is true here.
Mm,
But couldn't do it with sexuality. It's like that last stronghold for him. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
That like he couldn't even and so even for somebody like me, I had to be honest with you, like right from the jump. I like intellectually gotten there in a lot of ways, but I still
Mhm.
struggle with like feeling prudish and being embarrassed by people talking about sex or
Mm,
afraid to talk about it. And
mm,
so I think the project that you have here and what you're doing is so incredibly important. We talked before about like there's just not a lot of people because you can't even really talk about sex on social media too much. You can't show things you say you can't show a dildo on social media.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um
Mm,
and
I
I
want to yeah, go. Finish,
no,
sorry.
that's it. I just think it's so
Yeah.
valuable.
I wanna push back on one thing that, like, you're not
Please.
a theologian.
Okay.
I wanted to push back on that, like, in, like, seriousness, not in a, like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna encourage you way, but because I think it's really important who can claim to talk about God, you know?
Mm,
Like, I tell this story, which is what really happened to me. So I went to Harvard Divinity School because I thought I was a Hemingway scholar.
Mm,
And I wanted to my college thesis was on Hemingway and religion, and everything that I had read was, like, religion, like, people commenting on religion, and Hemingway was like, they haven't really studied theology, right? So I had a
mm,
full manuscript going into Harvard, and my thought was, I'm gonna revise this manuscript, I'm gonna learn theology, and
wow.
I'm going to finish. I'm gonna. This is my book, right? I that was my goal, and then I was gonna get a PhD in English and all of that. I went with this manuscript. I sat down with my advisor, Matthew Potts, who wrote this book on forgiveness, and he said to me, Connie, I think you should write your own theology. And I was like,
Mm,
no, 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 you got this all wrong, right? Like, I was here to learn theology. You're supposed to teach me that. Like, no, 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 like, no. And I sat on my computer and I like lost my mind for months because
wow.
I was like, how do you talk? Who am I to talk about God? Right. And
Hmm,
the thing that I learned that's like we are kind of the humility thing is also a construct, right? And like it's like you as a person who have wrestled with this, your experience with God is so valid. Your opinions about who God is and who God can be and the ways that God has not yet spoken is so valuable that like
mm,
it is why can some, really conservative theological bros claim that and you can't, right? Like I
yeah,
just
and they do.
I want to push back against that and be like, no, claim it because like it's so funny because I like made this video about like people tagging Dan McClellan on my comments, right? And one
Yeah.
of the comments, a lot of the comments were like, no, he has a PhD and you have an MDiv, so he's more qualified in this, right? And I just was like,
Yeah.
the thing I learned in school is just that I went to school to study work by people who didn't have my degree, right? Hemingway didn't
Mm,
go to college. Fitzgerald didn't go to college. Jesus has no MDiv or PhD, unfortunately. Unfortunately, right? Like our sense of qualification is a really skewed on like what makes someone, I don't even want to say an authority, but like what makes someone able to speak on God and to have that voice to matter, right? Yeah, I just wanted to push back on that because I think that's important. That's like one of the main things I learned at divinity school, which is just if you have a relationship with God, you
mm,
when you talk about it, right? Like we like especially women, I think like we are constructed that like men speak about God, right? Like men with a lot of degrees speak about God. And you can only speak about it
yeah.
if you know Hebrew and Greek and and all the iterations of the Bible, right? But like
Yes.
yeah, and what happens like, isn't God at the place where you feel so much pain after masturbating? Isn't God in the
Mm,
shame of that? Like, isn't
yeah.
that the most intimate place where the sacred can be encountered? Like, what are we talking about? Right? Like, that
Mm,
should qualify you to speak, right? Like, your weakness qualifies you to speak. And that isn't like talked about enough. What's the other thing that you said that I wanted to respond to? You were like, oh, the perspective of things, the positionality
mm.
from how you talk. You were saying, my God, this is gonna kill me. Okay, you said, sorry, not in my
It's
brain
okay.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I can respond to what you just said, and I want you to know that, like, I receive it not just as a quippy sort of, like, encouragement, right?
Yeah.
I actually receive that as a challenge. I'm reflecting on what you're
Mm,
saying because it makes me
mm,
actually think about something I think about with my children a lot, which is a
mm,
lot of parents, I think, have this mentality where they're going to suffer to give their children a better life, or it's all
mm,
about they want to succeed or to do whatever they want to accomplish, they want to do it for their children. And
mm.
one of the things I tried to tell myself is if all my kids see me do is model for them how not to find fulfillment in my own life, how not to be satisfied within my own life, then what I
Mhm,
am raising them to do is to be
mhm,
hollowed out adults who don't, and is
mm,
that the life that I want for them? And so one of the questions I ask myself, am I striving to live the life for myself that I
mm,
hope my children have someday?
mhm,
And you made me think of a point there because man, I do think I have perspective and things to say about
Mm-hmm.
God. And so if I lean into that self-deprecation too much, what does that make the people who might feel even less confident in me talking about God? What did that say to them about what they are and aren't allowed to do? And it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
part of the way that, oppression filters its way down through and
Yeah.
becomes a self-reinforcing construct. And I think it's also deeply tied to our conversation about sex, because
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about sex is not some like transgressive thing that we're trying to get people to accept. We're trying to say that sex and sexuality is a part of our experience, like pain is, like
Mm-hmm.
everything is.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of similar. The shame that I have talked about experiencing around sexuality is similar to the shame that I feel.
Mm,
Like I talk about it as embarrassment, like the
mm,
embarrassment that I would feel telling somebody that I was
mm,
a theologian, because
mm,
we all have different experiences. For me, Bonnie, I
mm.
went, or Connie, sorry, I
No,
went to
it's okay.
I went to undergrad and I got a church history degree, and
Yeah.
then I stayed to get my master's of arts in historical theology. And I completed all my coursework for that. All I had left was my thesis. I
Mm-hmm.
was working at a church on staff that had been at for 6 years, where I'm still deeply connected and love all of the people that are there.
Mm-hmm.
Very good friends of me. And so I want to be careful to be true to my experience when I express this without, trying to do it in a way where I'm shaming them.
Mm,
We've worked through a lot of this over the years, is why. But
mm,
the church who saw all of my potential, like the pastor and other people would
mm,
often tell me, "You have so much potential," eventually decided to let me go. That I
mm,
wasn't like, to them, for whatever reason, whatever reasons were given, the way I internalized that is, if they thought I was valuable, if they thought that like it mattered to have me, they would find a way to keep me. And so I even
mm,
though I left staff and they would replace me with somebody else as the youth
mm,
pastor, I stayed around and I went to that church for another 5 years after that.
mm,
And they never tapped me to do anything. They never asked me to volunteer again, to
mm,
lead anything again. And I thought,
mm,
wow, I'm still here. I would do a lot of things I was doing to be paid. I would do them for free. I've told them that, and they don't want me. And I internalized a lot of like shame
mm,
and around my
mm,
identity as somebody who has the
mm,
ability to do ministry or to talk about theology. And then I applied to work at churches, and I applied
mm,
at over 25 different churches with great references. And nobody wanted me. I got close to one job and they picked
mm,
the other guy over me,
mm,
and for a teaching pastor role for a college and career ministry at a large church here in Chicago. I was still living in Oklahoma at the time. And
mm,
they picked the other guy, and I asked, what should I do?
mm,
Right. This is interesting because this is going to connect even more to the experience of bodily shame. It's like,
mm,
like our whole human experience is connected. Our sexuality, our body,
mhm,
what I'm talking about now. I asked the interviewer, who was, a firm hired to do the hiring. So this wasn't like a pastor at this church. I
mm,
asked, what can I do
mhm,
as a candidate to be
mhm,
more successful in the future and maybe get the job that, like, what can I work on? What can I change to be a more, interesting candidate? And this is like 13 years ago. This is a long time
mm,
ago.
mm,
And he said, you should gain 70 pounds or lose 70 pounds, because right now you're big, but you're not so big that you can look like you're confident in being like the big guy, but you also look like you want to lose weight. And that will be distracting for people on stage. People will have a hard time listening to you. And then also, this other guy had 10,000 followers on Twitter, and you only have like 75 followers on Twitter, which means that he garners more natural influence. So the story that I told myself for 12 years, 12 and a half years after that, because it's only been recently that I've started to come out of any of that, was
mm,
I became a financial advisor. I sold cars for a year, sucked at that, became a financial advisor, stopped doing anything having to do with ministry, theology, religion. I did go on staff at a Hillsong church for a couple of years as like a small
mm,
groups director, which was, so it was less about
mm.
like doing theology. And that was like more recent. That's crazy. And I just needed to, I was in Chicago. I didn't have any friends. I went to a place where I knew people. And this is like, so it seems like it's off target, or it's off topic, but it seems to be connected to me internally. I told myself, like, I cut off those parts of myself
Yeah.
and told myself, like, because I also dropped out of school because I couldn't afford to stay in that next semester. So I never
Mm,
got my master's. I did all the coursework,
mm,
never finished it.
mm,
And
mm,
so I told myself, like, the people who got to see you at the most didn't find you valuable enough to keep you around. The people you went and talked to after that didn't want you around, didn't think that you had any value or anything to add. And so that was the story that I told myself, despite continuing to read theology, philosophy, political theory, despite having strong opinions and communicating them strongly to my friends. I felt like this is my interior life, and like nobody would benefit from that from me. So it wasn't until recently, through a lot of therapy, that my therapist convinced me to do exposure therapy and make a video and put it out on TikTok. He's like, no one's going to see it. 2 million people saw it. I was like, in the end of forcing me to do this. But you are calling out something else that I felt like I've told people, yeah, I've mastered, like I'm gaining proficiency with this part of myself. But the fact that I'm still afraid to say I'm a theologian or anything like that is interesting. And it's not fair, not only to me, but it's not fair to other people who are watching me. They might even be starting at more of a deficit than I'm at. But it's interesting because that shame also in my body, what I did. And I believe that, like you don't have to be thin or whatever to have value or worth. And some people are fat and they love being fat. And I think they should stay being fat. Right. I had gotten up to like 340 pounds at like 5'10". I was pretty big guy. I lost like 150 pounds. And that was just for me, my personal journey, like something that I decided to do. I don't think that everybody has to do it. But all of this to say, even when it comes to sexuality, because I'm not, to me, I told you it feels connected. We can do all of the learning that we want to do and about sexuality and still feel afraid and ashamed of our body. I can have all of this to say and still be ashamed or afraid of saying that I'm this or that. I've lost 150 pounds and have much closer to like the body now. And I lift weights and I do all the body now that like is socially acceptable and okay to live in the world and be comfortable in. But I still think that like I look bad and like I hate my body. And I ask my wife 10 times a week, do you still love me? Have I gained all my weight back? Because our perceptions of ourselves and of our bodies are so dissociated because of shame, because of guilt, because of our inability to view ourselves as people that matter. So if I were going back to talk to little Colton, practically, I tell him he has a penis. But also, I'd make sure he knows that, like, hey, your whole lived experience matters, right? Not just the parts that you feel like are okay to present to people, but all of it matters. Not because not in some self-important way, right? But but in the sense of like, don't run from who you really are. And that's, like I said earlier, one of the lessons that I'm constantly learning from watching my trans friends, right? Like, my trans friends have more courage and more like awareness of themselves and more like ability to be themselves than I've ever expressed or experienced. And so, I don't, I'm rambling a little bit right now, but you saying that really sparked all of that for me, thinking about how we hold shame in our bodies and how it even dictates and controls the language that we use to think about ourselves and talk about ourselves when it comes to sex, when it comes to our bodies outside of sex, when it comes to our place in the world and how what we are and aren't allowed to give of ourselves.
Yeah. I'm really struck by that story. I never thought it was not connected, by the way, just FYI. But like the what I hear is a story about power, right? It's about the power that like is being denied. And you're ironically told that there is not even ironically is not the right word. It's violent. They're saying that there's too much of Colton, too much of Colton's body. There's too much and not enough. So that's really helpful, like goal to give someone to accomplish. It's really cruel. And I'm like, of course that translates into the bedroom, right? Even if you are just by yourself, even if you're just masturbating, like your idea of who your body is, who your body can be, what does it look like for you to even desire yourself is constantly shaped by how the world treats you, right? Like as much as we say all of this self-empowerment, I call bullshit, but like we are community creatures, right? Like we impact each other, right? Like it's not, you talk to a child and you say, I think that, this is beautiful. I think your hair, your black hair is beautiful. I think, your features are beautiful, versus you tell a child, you give the child, I'm thinking of a particular example that I can't say
Mhm.
publicly, but when you tell a child that like only like white features are desirable, right? You create something. You create the sense of shame and
Mm.
guilt of it and the detachment from the body, right? Because everyone does want to be recognized. And it just strikes me as like I'm like just pausing, because I'm like, what does the Bible say about weight? Is there anything in the Bible about weight and desirability and so on and so forth? And nothing is immediately coming to mind, but it feels so antithetical. And there's just so many ways, there's so many ways that shame can come and live inside the body, right? And it's
Yes.
like, I wonder if the affirming of like, if it helps to say, hi, I'm Colton, I'm a theologian,
Mm.
and that not feeling fully like who's that saying that thing over there, right? Like, I am Connie, what identity am I scared to own? I am Connie, I am a witch, right?
Mm.
She's like maybe somewhere over there, right? I am
Right, right.
Connie, like whatever it is, right? And I remember going to my MFA, and I say the biggest thing that I learned from my MFA actually happened in the first email that I got, where it just said, "Hi, writers." And I was like, no, no, no. I write academic
Ooh.
articles. Like, that's what I do. I'm a writer. No, 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 no. I don't
Hmm.
do creative writing. Like, like claiming the identity makes
Claiming it.
you, right? Like claiming the identity, saying, hi, I'm Connie, I'm a writer. I'm much better. That doesn't feel divorced from my body anymore. I'm not dissociating,
Right.
right? But I've
That's good.
yeah, yeah, right. Like, I'm not dissociating. And so like it takes time, it takes practice, it takes, for me, like, witch is a term that I want to claim, I want to reclaim for women, right? Because of what witch has
Yeah.
traditionally been.
Yes.
It's just people, it's just women who are fighting against power. And I'm like, let's claim that, right?
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
it's
that's
like,
good. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, does the claiming that make you feel more desirable in the bedroom? Of course it
Mm.
would translate. Like, but we don't talk about
Yes.
that because we can only talk about the first part. Claiming the identity is good, but like the pleasure in fully being yourself, right? Like you reference how trans people hold up this mirror, and I'm like, this was the question I wanted to ask earlier, which was, when trans people hold up the mirror for you, what have you seen that you were afraid of in yourself?
So I think specifically, like one of the first times I recognized this had to do
Yeah.
with my body and my weight and my eating.
Mm, mm,
Be able to, because for a long time, I never even told anybody what that guy had said to me and how that caused
mm,
me to think about my body and my eating. What I
mm.
started doing, Connie, it's interesting because we do, when we're ashamed of our sex lives, we
Yeah.
still do it. Like guys still watch porn, but they tell you that they
Yes.
don't
Yeah.
because they're ashamed. So they do it in secret. Eating,
Yeah.
I started eating almost nothing in front of anybody. If I was eating a communal meal, I would barely touch it. I
Mm,
wouldn't eat anything. And I would
mm,
eat in secret constantly when nobody was around. I would eat
mm,
so much in secret because I gained over probably 100 pounds after that guy said that. Like I was not like big, and I did
mm,
it in a short period of time. Like I would go and then because I was doing it, I felt shame for doing it, and so I would do it even more, almost to punish myself.
mm,
And like I would eat until I was in physical pain and my skin would get bruises. I would eat until like I just felt like I was gonna die.
mm,
I think it's interesting, how can a faith that breeds shame around sex, where people are forced to do it in private, also lead to such depravity, where men do such awful things with sex? And I think
mhm.
anytime you force a part of your identity into hidden, it's secret,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's going to manifest in negative ways. And one of the first things I saw when I looked when I looked at a trans person, they as a mirror that reflected the reality of myself back to myself, and I thought, what is it that I'm not embracing? It's kind of like, and gosh, this is so bad because this is not a good example, because being fat and having a fat body and enjoying food is not the same thing as alcoholism at all. I don't mean to draw the connection, but like in AA, you say you own your identity. right? I
Yeah.
am Colton. I am an alcoholic. And
Mm.
so like I started like telling myself just the truth about myself
Yeah.
and that I loved my body. I tried to lose weight so many times and failed. And every time it was born out of a desire, out of a hatred for myself. Like I hated my body. I
Mm.
hated the way I looked. I wanted to change and be different. When
Mm.
I saw a trans person, and I think their name was like Alok something, they're like pretty big on social media and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
phenomenal writer and poet.
Yes.
And they were talking about this idea, like exactly what I'm talking about how trans people are brave and like straight people are afraid because trans people reveal to them like what that they expose that they're hiding something about themselves. I
Yeah.
thought like, have a body that I love. And it
Mm.
was like out of love for my body that I started just to make different choices for me that,
Mm.
it's something in a change and in a different outcome. And I think
Mm.
that anytime we like don't do that, we hide ourselves, we hurt ourselves and we end up
Yeah.
hurting other people. And, it's so interesting talking about it in the context of who can and can't talk about God. Because you made me think about this quote from Gregory of Nyssa, right in the fourth
Mm-hmm.
century. I think today there's this idea, like a lot of people have takes or whatever, but like it's like viewed as like, who are you to talk about God? Like who are,
Mm.
like,
Yeah.
I get that from people. Like you're like, you're not
I felt
are
that.
you're not a theologian. Yeah, you feel that.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting how like that's actually pretty different than it used to be in the
Mm.
earlier times in Christianity. I have this quote pulled up from Gregory Nyssa from his oration on the deity of the Son and the Holy Spirit. And he's just describing what it was like in Nyssa in that area at the time, what the people were like. He says,
Mm.
everywhere in the public squares, at crossroads and on the streets and lanes,
Mm.
people would stop you and discuss at random about the Trinity. If you asked something of a money changer, he would begin discussing the question of the begotten and the unbegotten.
Mm.
If you questioned a baker about the price of bread, he would answer that the Father is greater than the Son and is subordinate to him. If you went to take a
Mm.
bath, the bath attendant would tell you that in his opinion, the Son simply comes from nothing, right? And
Mm.
I remember reading that and being amazed because I thought like, you think today, like people don't have the capacity to talk about that. These are people like a long time ago that all felt
Mhm.
empowered to have these really strong opinions about things that now, if you even question or talk about, it's like anathema
Mhm.
to you, you're a heretic, you're gonna have like,
Mm.
I get stitched constantly from people making videos about like why I'm a bad guy or,
Mhm.
don't listen to this snake, stuff like
Mm.
that. And it's like, he's just describing that like the bread maker and the bath
Yeah.
attendant would
Yeah.
be arguing with you whether or not the son is begotten or eternal. you
Yeah.
know,
And to
it's
keep in mind that a lot of them were illiterate, right? And that what they
illiterate.
only
Yes,
received was through art and masses and sermons, what have you, right? Through other people.
yes,
And
100%.
that gave people their experience of God was valid.
Isn't it amazing,
Yeah.
Connie, that especially the Theo bros, like a lot of people who like church history, the time that they look back on as like the greatest period in the church is the time when all of the settled questions were unsettled. Where
Yeah.
where you said something earlier that I was like, ooh, people, if the wrong person hears that, they are not going to like that. That your professor told you to write your own theology.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
think they were doing in the
Yeah.
greatest times in the history of the church as they were
Mhm.
writing the theology? I get
Mhm.
to know. I love like Dan McClellan. He's a great. Like I think biblical critical scholarship is very very important and it helps us.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think people get caught up in this idea that there is a right way or wrong way to read the text, when or
Yeah.
to think about God or to think about theology. When in reality, like they were writing their own theology, and I think. To me, the most beautiful part of Christian tradition is that it doesn't all come from Scripture. Like
Yeah.
Dan and other critical scholars will often point to, like the doctrine of the Trinity isn't in the Bible.
Yeah.
So what? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
others, the people writing that theology, they didn't claim it was. It's like, oh, that's
Mhm.
just Greek theology making its way into the church. Yeah, because it was dope and like it was like it
Yeah.
provided. And there's some of it that's not dope, but it's like
Yeah.
they were thinking creatively, right?
Yeah.
Wrestling with it,
Yeah.
transfiguring themselves and transfiguring the text through that relationship. Do we have a relationship with God, or are we just property of God?
I love that. And the first thing I want to say is just that I would love to hear a fat theology around eating from you.
Yeah.
No, who is more qualified to do that, right? Like what,
Mm.
how did God enter those experiences? I'm like, do that. Like, I want to hear, like,
Mm,
yes, right? Like, what does it feel like? Where did you encounter the sacred? Where did that turn happen of like, I'm
mm,
going to love my body? Why? Who told
mm,
you to love your body, right? You only had one voice, which was what's the voice of that person hiring you. You're not fat enough, you're not skinny enough. And look, but you know, like, so that voice entered, right? And then where did the love come in? Where did that even, where from within you did you encounter that well, right? Of like not doing it from a place of, I'm going to give the world less, Colton. You are actually like taking care of your body in the way that's like, I want to give the world more of me because of my love for my body, you know?
I'm gonna say something, right? So, like, trigger
Yeah.
warning for
Yeah.
suicidal ideation for
Mhm.
anybody that's watching. In the summer of 2020, I made a decision that I was going to I have not said this, like, publicly before.
Mhm.
I that that even though I desperately wanted to live and I didn't want to die,
Mm.
that I felt that I was incapable
Mm.
of achieving the potential other people saw in me, and that if I continued to live, I would
Mm.
only ever be a disappointment for
Mm.
people. And I decided that I was going to take my life. And I wrote a long letter explaining that like nobody did this like that. What's crazy is I had a great marriage, great relationship with my best friend, great friendships. Like I'm so lucky to have like this rare group of guys that I've been friends with for 16, 17 years. And we've all
Mm.
developed and grown together and we talk every day and we're besties and we bare our souls to each other. And
Mm.
so I have all these, like, great relationships, but
Mm.
I convinced myself that, like, that I was not adding any value to anybody's life, that I was detracting value from
Mm.
everybody's life, and so that was the best solution. So I explained that in a note to everybody, and what changed was I wrote a note, I doubled my life insurance to $4,000,000 to make sure that, like, hey, like, my wife is graduating from law school, like, she wanted to do immigration law, and
Mm.
she was gonna have to go into big law because for us, in order to survive and pay back our loans and do stuff, she was so it's like because I haven't been able to make enough money to allow her to take a job that pays less, doing something that
Mm.
matters to her, I'll free her from this. I'll give her the opportunity to like live the life that she would just not get to live and then end up resenting me for. A month later, despite having been married for and together for 8 or 9 years at that point, married, not getting pregnant, even trying. She came and she said that she was pregnant and they were gonna have a child. And so it started off as like thinking about like, well, now I can't do that because
Mm.
what will that teach my child about their worth? And we kind of already hit on this. Like that's when
Yes.
I talked about like that I think a lot about how the way I'm living teaches my son. Like m-
Mhm.
our children learn from watching us more than the things that we intentionally try to teach them, like far
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
And so, like, what will he grow up thinking about his worth? That his dad didn't even want him, that he didn't want to be around. And I thought, I can't do that to him. And then I started thinking about like how much I hated myself. And I was like, I
Mm.
don't want my son to like grow up watching me model that for him. So it started
Mm.
off as doing it for somebody else.
Mm.
But I also thought like, well, I have to then I can't perform that forever. Like I'm done.
Mhm.
Like I was ready to end my life because I was done performing what I thought people wanted to see in me. I was like,
Yeah.
I can't do it anymore. And so I can't do that with him. So I thought like I
Mm.
have to like find a way to like learn to love myself. And it was at that moment that like voices like Alok and other trans uh voices like entered my life. And I started to see like that act of like transitioning is such like a powerful and profound act of self-love that
Mm.
they're going to affirm themselves. And so
Mm.
I kind of like I really started listening to like trans voices a lot more. And that's where a lot of that came from. And as I started to I told people that I'm eating in secret. Everyone's like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Like you don't eat anything in front of everybody. You keep gaining weight.
Mm.
You know, you start to realize like
Mm.
those things that you're trying to hide about yourself. Come on,
Mm.
like, you don't watch porn? Come on.
Mm.
We all know you watch porn. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
you're not eating anything? Come on. We all know you're
Yeah.
eating. Like,
Yeah.
when I started to just, like, own the reality,
Yeah.
whether in a neutral way, like, "This is what it is. Here's what I'm doing," and started to make different choices, I tried to make sure also not to lose weight in a very toxic way of, like,
Mm.
just wanting to lose so, like, it took me I lost 150 pounds, but that was over 4 years. So I
Mm.
just started trying to make decisions that I would want my child to make for them. That's really kind of
Mm,
what it came out of. What would I want
mm,
their relationship with the food to look like? And,
mm,
for as bad as, like, a lot of self-help stuff out there is, like, some self-help books that I had read that talked about positive affirmations
yeah,
actually were a little bit helpful, and I just started to, like,
yeah,
speak to myself and almost
yeah,
kind of reprogram my brain.
yeah,
You are worthy of love, like, you
yeah,
are more than enough. You don't have to achieve anything in order to
yeah,
be loved. Losing the weight isn't going to make you a better person. Like, I would just kind of, like, tell myself this stuff, like, as I was working out or, when I
mm,
got into the gym, all I could do was walk at, like, 2 miles an hour on the treadmill because, like, my ankles would just flame up in pain from walking
mm,
because of carrying the weight. So that's what changed. Was just
mm,
like a radical reckoning, and I don't think that people have to reach the end of their rope to get there, but I think what we have to do is stop hiding. It doesn't mean you have to have sex in front of people, but if you're having sex, don't pretend that you're not, right?
mm,
Don't hide that, right? Don't put it under a
yeah,
bushel, right? Don't let Satan
yeah.
blow it out, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I am I am so struck by the kind of the God that you were presented with that made it possible for the voice of that man to be congruent, you know?
Mm,
Because like the affirmations that you started saying are just not things that we were taught in church. Like you are
mhm,
sinful, you are, like
right.
of course you're not worthy. Like of course you're not all you're not enough, right? Like the God that emerged, the love that emerged for your son. Like what I hear is that the love for your son is this overflowing thing because love doesn't have there's no scarcity in it. Like it feels what I hear is that it I want to say overcame you. And like there's this, we were talking about theology earlier and like how what is biblical, what is in the Bible, what is not, right? Like one of my master's thesis, which is a book that I've written and know it's this very esoteric auto theory, mystical vision kind of book that is
Mm,
definitely not sellable. But in it, I talk about the image of the vulva as the side wound, right? And the monks like kissing
yes,
it, right?
yeah,
And I write about it. For me, it's really important that God is trans. Oh my God, this video is gonna get so much love. It's really important to me that God is trans because I don't believe a God who came here and became fully human is only satisfied with the male experience, right?
mhm,
And the way that we describe the side wound and of
mhm,
it being a home and it's this overflowing life and abundance that we suck on to sustain the ever eternal life, right? And so for
yes,
me in the trans image, right, Jesus, there's this entire book that is absolutely fascinating about Jesus' penis and like when it's revealed and not revealed.
yeah,
I don't have the name of the book in my top of my head right now, but it's the idea of Jesus having a vulva and a penis on the cross is to
mm,
me the most moving image that we
mm,
have in the church. And
mm,
like isn't it doesn't surprise me at all that seeing a trans person in that way and I'm not trying to make this theology work for me because this doesn't exist, right? Like in the Bible explicitly.
mhm,
But to me, right, like what's in the Bible is I feel like I can't say any of this publicly, but like what's in the Bible is not important. How we talk about it, the
sure,
images that we construct about it is what sits in our imagination, right? Like the
mhm,
Bible has other voices in there that could have counteracted what that man said to you, right?
yes,
But
100%,
that
yeah,
wasn't what you were taught. That wasn't the affirmations given to you. And so
right,
what does it matter? Right? Like in it like probably need to cut this out. But what
no,
does it matter? And
yeah,
so it feels it feels on the same like it feels so heart-wrenching to me, not because you were at like not because you were at the end of your rope. It's that how did all those relationships around you that were good wasn't enough that you needed a relationship to yourself, the capital S self, that
uh,
reflected a relationship that we can have with God you know, it's the personal relationship aspect of it that is so kind of glorified and yet so abused that creates the incubator for this, right? Like for this, like you were living like a half life, like in secret, right? Like you were living
Yes.
so much of it in secret. And you know, what happens when we lift the fig leaf? How can we live in a way that we choose to live in a way despite our construction to uncover the
Yes.
fig leaf? How do we do that? Because there is no fig leaf in the Bible. We did that. We painted that.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I think, I hear what you're saying. Like people, I think could hear that wrong. That's why it feels like
Yeah.
you can't say that like what's in the Bible doesn't technically matter, even though that's already how everybody already lives and experiences it.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, you know, hands down, right? And but it makes me think of Augustine
Mm.
saying on Christian doctrine, right? That it's like anyone who thinks that they've understood the scriptures or any part of them, but cannot by his understanding of them build up this double love for God and neighbor has not yet succeeded in understanding them. And that like this
Mm.
idea that like, what is a good reading of the text? A good reading of the text, he says, is any reading that makes you love God and to love your neighbor. Right.
Mm.
And how are we told in other parts to love our neighbor? To love our neighbor as ourselves. And so for me, that fits into there too. So yeah, I think it's like I think what I hear Augustine saying is like, you can read it saying whatever you want it to say as long as it results in love. And if it doesn't, it's a bad reading. And that was something that Chris Green drilled into our head. Like Chris Green would always say that the moment you pick up the Bible to win an argument, you are already wrong. The moment you use the Bible to defeat somebody, you are already using it unchristianly. That anybody can read the Bible, construct an argument from it. But to read the Bible Christian is to read the Bible for the edification of ourselves, of God, and for the church or for the world. Interestingly, he also was the first person that ever made me think about Jesus having an erection, which was something in ethics that he made sure that we talked a lot about. It was like you understand that like Jesus was a teenage boy who touched himself, who had erections, right? And I think it is all back to the kind of beginning of the conversation, talking about like, what kind of a God do we worship? Is a God that became fully human, is what Christians believe. And so fully like human. And I think that like, people ask what I think about like the Gnostic texts or stuff like that all the time. And like, I recognize that like the historical critical scholarship shows us like a lot of them were written later or not authentic or whatever the case might be. I think I still desire to see like a text that talks about Jesus as having had a lover. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As having like embodied that. And I think to your question of what is it like, how did worshiping a male God impact my sexuality? It's almost just not specific enough. It's like, what is it like? What was my experience like and how did it impact my sexuality worshiping a male God who didn't have sex?
Yeah.
Dramatically, because that impacts, my how I perceive myself. I'm trying to be like Christ. What does it look like to be Christ-like as a human? Well, certain, and this is how you get to somebody like Paul, probably. Not only do you think that like the end of the world coming back, we don't have time, but like, why do this?
Yeah.
Why have those experiences?
And that is also what makes it feel holy, or you're in a great relationship when you're a woman in church, at least for me, when the guy isn't right, like isn't expressive, doesn't know their desire. That is holy, right? It's
But
a really
that repression though is dangerous, like you said, and it leads to all kinds of other things. I don't know if this is cancelable. I don't know if I think this sounds right, but I don't know. I have a rule. That like with our boys, I will never let them be babysat by straight men. I will only let gay men babysit my children.
yeah.
Right. And people are like, well, why? And I'm like, I went to college with a lot of straight men. I know a lot of straight pastors who are not straight, who end up doing fucked up, awful things. And I think a lot of that comes from and I don't know, because there's straight men who are straight and they're not repressing anything. I just don't know. But what I know is like that like gay men and trans people, they're not like, maybe they're hiding other things about their body, but they're hiding a lot less. Like they've had that bravery to come out to be who they really are. And I think that like we get into so much we are in the danger zone when we're around people, or even
Mm,
ourselves are dangers and threats to other people when we're hiding parts of ourselves that we are ashamed of. And that's why I think you have so many, like, why do we have so many straight pastors molesting boys?
mhm.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah. There's a TikTok video going around right now where it's like, not all men, then hire a straight male babysitter. Oh, you're not? Why not? Like, why not? Right?
that's right.
And yeah, and it's there's a lot of men in the comments who are like, "Oh my God, this like really opened up something for me," and I'm like, well, great, because like someone has to say it, someone has to listen, someone has to reflect, right? But it's like
Mhm.
women have known this, women just live this, right? Yeah. And so this has been a fascinating conversation. Is
Yeah,
there
same here.
anything else that you were like, oh, I thought of this, I thought of that? We can just insert it here.
Not too much. There was a thought I had in that last part of that conversation about like that hiddenness, and like it's actually so like common and pervasive in the ministry world, like how many
Yes.
people are gay.
Mm,
When I going to a conservative evangelical Christian university where a lot of people went there that became pastors, their dads were mega church pastors, now they're pastoring those churches. I know a lot of like people like that are
mm-hmm,
pastoring leading large churches who have all kinds of, thoughts and opinions and different things. And it's like there's a church in Tulsa. It's pastored now by two brothers I went to school with, who
mm-hmm,
their dad was the pastor. We're talking like 15,000 plus member church. And one of the brothers is gay, and everybody knows that he's gay. He's not out, right? So I'm not going to say who they are, right? But like, yeah, everybody knows that he's been caught multiple times looking at gay porn, right? Like,
mm,
like I know a handful. I know that a handful of the people on the worship team that have slept with other male friends of mine, like guys on the worship team that have slept with male friends of mine, or that
mm,
they see them on Grinder.
mm,
And yet, even in the midst of all like this hiddenness, like the violence that has to be enacted to make the reason I'm saying this is we ask like, what do we do to like unhide, or how do we change this? Like,
mm-hmm,
I don't want it to feel like the inertia is so impossible to overcome. It's
mm,
not. Like, patriarchy and oppressive systems know that, so they have to
mm-hmm.
constantly enforce it. So,
Yeah.
like, they recently at this church had a guest preacher come who just spent 1 hour bashing Muslims and gay people. I counted he
Mm,
used gay as an insult 23 times. Like, he's
mm,
literally like, "I came here all the way to you from socialist gay Australia," like that, like, just outrageous to where, like, I didn't even experience that growing up. Like, people said
mm,
homosexuality is sin, but they said it with, like, more tact. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
so, like, to feel that kind of aggression. Why is it becoming more and more aggressive? Like, my first long
Mm,
form YouTube video that I'm working on right now is about how the next generation of megachurch pastors, there was a period of time in, like, 20 up to, like, 2018 that they had not only a progressive aesthetic, but were leaning
mm,
into progressive ideas. And I was having
mm,
conversations with people who pastor churches
mm,
that celebrities go to, and like people know who these people are. And I'm having like conversations with them where they're questioning and challenging on shifting on gay marriage, shifting on
mm,
universal salvation, interested in all these different things. And then when Black Lives Matter and COVID hit, it kind of forced them into a place where they couldn't openly wrestle with anymore. They had to either go fully one way or go fully the other way, and they retreated to that comfortable space. And I think because they know, and now that generation of like church pastors, despite still having a progressive aesthetic, I think are actually more dangerously right wing and authoritarian than even their parents' generation was, like the moral majority
mm,
generation.
mhm.
I feel like the aggressiveness is so much stronger. Like in that example I gave you of that sermon,
Yeah.
like I mean, literally spent an hour saying fight, fight, fight. If you don't, the Muslims are going to come and they're going to kill you. Like literally saying that in the sermon.
Mm,
And this is how you get like the toxic empathy. Like
yeah.
would their parents' generation have said like empathy is toxic? I don't think they were there yet. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Mm,
and I think that's because like the awareness that they have, that people
mhm,
have, like the more aware, you have to be careful, because as you start to unpack these things, or as you start to change these things, like that shame and guilt, it like rises up even more. And like that
mm,
desire to like oppress it and push it back down rises up even more, to the point where, you start to get really dangerous rhetoric. And I think we see that happening in that church right now. So I'm working on something
mm,
to talk about that there.
mm,
But that was happening in a context where the senior
mm,
pastor's brother, who's a pastor on staff, and like, come on, dude. Like, I know we lived in the dorms together, bro. Like, like, stop this, right? And stop amening the guy. Stop pretending. But that danger that we do to ourselves. So the last thing I'll
mm,
say here to
Yep.
tie that, is it just reminds me of the bell hooks book. And I think if men really want to reframe their sexuality and their masculinity in a healthy
Mm,
way that's not like bashing men, but
mm,
like I've never felt more uplifted than reading The Will to Change Men,
mm,
Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hook.
mm,
And one of the things she says in there, and that you have to keep in mind as a man when you're thinking about sexuality, is that the first act of violence that the patriarchy demands of men is not violence against women, but violence against themselves, because
mhm,
patriarchy demands of all men that they commit acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they cut off
mhm,
the parts of them, the emotional parts of themselves. And it's
mhm,
so hard, I think, because we are so, like we've talked about it as like splitting or dissociating. We are so dissociated, not just from you. I don't think men can start to have a sexual ethic and attitude towards sexuality until they start to have, until they till they can have a healthy understanding of their own just base emotions. So I would
mm.
recommend that book for any dude listening, and for any woman that has men that they love.
And like, isn't it, like today we got to hear about the harm that it actually caused you, right? Not in some
Oh yeah,
abstract sense of patriarchal harm for like, but like this is what you actually experienced. And
yes,
isn't it so antithetical to love? And like, how do you love your neighbor when you cannot love yourself? How do you,
yes,
love? How can you love God's creation when you don't understand the part that involves pleasure, right? Like how do you
yes, yes.
how can you even begin to understand the connection to the sacred through the orgasm, right? Like it's like I think about Teresa of Avila's sculpture with Bernini, right? Like
Mm,
captured in this moment of orgasmic ecstasy, right? And that
mhm.
we have the artist progressively trying to like throw that in there of like here is
Yeah,
an of that, and here's Teresa writing about her experience. And is it possible to encounter God in masturbation? Is it possible to encounter God in the shame after
mm,
masturbation? Or is our only story that you experience shame and you get kicked out of the garden, right? Like, what
yeah,
version of the story do we throw ourselves in thorns? Because it sounds like you did what
yeah,
Origin did. We are taught to do that. And so
mhm.
have a lot to practice on the body, and like to
Yes,
play with our body. How do we play with our body that God created, if you believe that, right?
mhm.
Like, how do we, if you are still Christian listening, how do you love God's creation? And
Yeah,
if you're not Christian still listening, how do you honor this love that I think we all still feel connected to on some level?
absolutely. I know I said I was done. I have to say this because
Yes.
if I don't, I'll be mad at myself.
Okay.
Is I think we've said so much good about what we can do interiorly and actually to ourselves by experimenting with our body, experiencing pleasure and joy. And a
Hmm.
lot of that though will be done privately. But I
Yeah.
really believe that our personal liberation is bound up with
Yeah.
our collective liberation. And
Mm,
so I think that maybe if we want to liberate ourselves, a danger there is to slide into this liberal
hmm.
American Western self optimization, self realization. You know what I mean? Like,
Individualistic.
yeah, some people who practice polyamory like disgust me a little bit because it feels like rooted in I am going to become polyamory doesn't disgust me. I'm talking about specific people. Like I am just becoming this like fully realized version of myself. And
Mm,
it's like, what are we doing in community? And so like I think
mm.
like being involved, and this is why people are like, dude, you can't keep mixing theology and politics so much. I don't know how to think about theology outside of thinking about the liberation of my
Pop.
neighbor and of the people around the world. Right. And so, it is all bound up together. Like, why are like liberate yourself for yourself and for your neighbor, right? Develop that love.
How does sex happen in community that is not having sex with everyone?
I don't know. I think by being honestly being okay to talk about sex.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, my three best guy friends and I, they say we talk all the time. Like
Yeah.
we talk about our, not the intimate details of our sex life. Some things are just, not you
Private.
don't
Yeah.
yeah, there's private. But like when like we have talked in detail about about our bodies or about like our sexual experiences in the past or things that shaped us or changed us or mistakes that we've made sexually. And so yeah, I think maybe having community of people that like where you can fully be yourself
Mm-hmm.
and present yourself. You go, well, how do I find that? Well, first you have to be willing to be that for somebody else. Like,
Mm.
is there somebody that can come to you that
Yeah.
can like present like those undesirable parts of themselves to you and feel
Mm.
love, accepted? And so, we start to do that. I think that's a big part of that.
Amazing. Thank you. Today I'm thrilled to talk to you, and we went way over time, but I love it. We will see you soon. Hopefully in next season.
Yes,
I would love to have you on again.
I love it.
Thank you for showing me your God.
Thank you, Connie. Thanks for having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk about this. Because, like I said, as a man, sometimes you're afraid to talk about
Mm,
sexuality because you don't want to be looked at as like a sex based man. I don't know.
mm.
This has been a challenging conversation in the best way possible.
And follow Colton on Substack, which
Mhm.
is there's a new paid tier. Tell us about a little bit of that and the YouTube channel where people can
Okay, yeah.
find you.
You can find me on Substack. You can just put in my name, and Colton is spelled with an E-N, not an O-N, C-O-L-T-E-N. You'll get lost with the O-N. Colton Barnaby or Kensington Cone. It's free. Every article I put up is free for 6 weeks.
Mhm.
After that, the full archive is available for people who contribute to help me feed my family so that I can continue to do this work. And that's $8 a month is the option for that. And if you really want it and you just cannot afford it, reach out to me. I know I can bypass that to give access to people. But you can find me on Instagram at coltenbarnaby.com. Same thing on TikTok and on YouTube at Colton Barnaby1. And also my podcast, Ask the Next Question, on YouTube and everywhere you find podcasts.
Amazing. Follow him, learn from him. I learned so much from Colton, and I know you will too. All right.